Most of the films in this series are about the scientist's quest for future knowledge. This one is no less scientific, but it's about the search for things that have been and aren't any longer. To uncover the way we used to be, to find out what we came from, what helped to make us the way we are today, has meant combining the skills of a whole team of scientists in what is really a detective story.
In a small, densely populated room in the University of Liverpool School of Medicine, Robert Connolly, a lecturer in anatomy, is trying to find the blood group of a skeleton's owner, despite the fact that it's hundreds of years since he had any blood. More detective work has recreated a bell that was destroyed almost 4.5 centuries ago. From the clues of the past, a 700-year-old kiln has been rebuilt and refired. Now it produces 13th century tiles just as it did in 1281.
Now, who's a nice tall volunteer to lay in our coffin? OK. Do you know how tall you are?
5'8".
And all these secrets have been prized from the earth for the people of a new town to look at what, of their own ancient history, remains to be seen.
Well, he's got a bit of room still at the bottom, hasn't he? So this proves a thing.
In 1970, Runcorn Development Corporation set about building a new town a few miles from Liverpool, but on this, the south side of the River Mersey. And they found that they'd inherited in the ancient parish of Halton an overgrown site which the history book said had once been a priory. So they appointed a young archaeologist to investigate, and his team, once they'd cleared away centuries of trees and shrubs and undergrowth, started scraping slowly backwards through the years of occupation.
Every detail of texture and composition was charted before being removed. Every shred of evidence, even when it looked no more than a long-since-dead dog's dinner, was cleaned, logged, and stored away. The bones themselves and the pots they were cooked in were meticulously labelled and catalogued. This painstaking sifting of the buried evidence showed that Runcorn New Town had, in Norton Priory, one of the biggest medieval monastic sites in Britain. The archaeologist Patrick Green is still there and still investigating.
How does it come about that there's a priory here near Runcorn at all?
In the medieval period, it was very much the pattern of large landowners to establish a priory in which their ancestors and their descendants could be buried. Here it was the Baron of Halton who established a priory in the 12th century, and which, as we see, grew to really quite large size by the end of the medieval period.
It did. Is there a precise date for its start?
1134 it was founded, yes.
And what was it then?
It was really a small monastic house of standard complement, which was 12 canons, and the prior, who was head of the household. But the evidence we have from the excavation is that it grew really quite rapidly and became really one of the larger monastic houses of Cheshire. It was very much a case of building to the glory of God and building really on a grandiose scale, partly to the glory of God, but also the glory of the benefactors. Having generously backed the place, they wished this to be represented to their families and to the other families around. They wished their generosity to be seen.
Yeah. So it's a bit like the way that businessmen nowadays put their money into the local football team.
Very much so, very much so. Though with this, I think the results were rather more permanent.
But not as permanent as they no doubt imagined. In the 1530s, after falling out with Rome when the Pope wouldn't countenance his divorcing Catherine of Aragon, Henry VIII overthrew the monasteries. 400 years after its foundation, Norton Priory was sold off for the benefit of the state's coffers to a family of Cheshire landowners, the Brookes. They demolished most of the buildings and put up a Tudor mansion. Later on in their 400 years of ownership, that too was demolished and replaced with a Georgian house. In the 1930s, the estate grew into a jungle, and that's how it stayed until the bulldozers arrived to clear the way for Runcorn New Town, followed by the archaeologists who undertook a rather more delicate earth removal job. They opened up the secrets of the site to its inheritors in the 1980s. Local school children are shown round by Pauline Bearpark, the site's information officer.
Now, can you get somewhere where you can see? Well as finds, we have to record everything that's found here. We record the finds by marking them so you know exactly where they're found. But if you can see this fellow here, he's got a frame with wires across it, and he's recording all those stones exactly where they're found, so that you make an accurate drawing of whole sites. Any questions?
How long have you been excavating this site?
Well, I've been excavating here since about 1971. The first trial trench was in 1970 when we found there was a good site here to excavate. And in 1971 we started excavating. But as you can see from what you've walked around, we've done an awful lot.
Some of the most exciting finds lay within inches of the surface weeds. The scraping gradually uncovered, within the outline of the walls that were beginning to show up, more than 30 stone coffins, most of them still bonily occupied.
Right, not that far, this far.
The elaborately carved coffin lids, chiselled from local sandstone, are stored in the museum's warehouse.
They were actually in position, nearly all of them, over the graves that they'd been placed over in the medieval period. And it was actually during the excavation, during the methodical removal of layers of soil, that we eventually came down to the level at which they had been placed. They'd been actually set in the floor of the medieval church, projecting through it, rather in the way of a modern grave slab set within a Westminster Abbey or something like that, as a memorial that people coming to the church would see. All of them have the cross motif on it, the Christian cross. This is basic. But some of these have taken that motif and they've turned it into something really quite fantastic in that sense of the word. There's a lot of fantasy gone into it. There's one, for example, in which the cross has turned into an oak tree, a sort of tree of life, which is growing from a human face. In another case, a strange griffin-like creature has a vine growing from its mouth, and the tail of the griffin is turned into a dog's head, and that too has a vine growing from it. And both of these twine either side of the cross. Well, the burials were immediately beneath, and on a hot June day it must have been rather unpleasant. Though, from the excavation, we do know that they put quicklime into the graves, obviously to reduce the smell, and some of the sandstone coffins have a drain hole in the bottom that the decaying fluids of the body could drain out through. But still, on a hot day, it must have been somewhat unpleasant.
Well, now why have we got these coffins here? Now this one in the middle isn't a mum, as you might assume, and 3 babies. But they tell us that this one in the middle is a man. A man aged about 35. That one to the left there is a child of about 4. That one to the right there is a child of about 2. And this one at the back, made up of odd stone slabs, is a baby of about 12 months. Now they can date baby skeletons to within a few months of their life, so they do know these quite accurately. We've had some 150 skeletons from Norton, and they've all gone off to Liverpool School of Medicine to be studied, and they can tell us quite a lot about the bodies from just the bones that are left behind.
Bones are conspicuously short of blood, and the Norton Priory skeletons are no exception. And yet, 800 years after it stopped flowing in their medieval veins, Robert Connolly, a forensic scientist at Liverpool University, is identifying the blood groups. That's his own blood is adding to a liquid that contains extracted chemicals from the medieval skeletons. Almost all the cells in our bodies, including the ones that bones are made of, contain these chemical substances, and they determine our blood group. There are 2 people like Connolly who don't have these substances. That means they're blood group O. To his own group O blood, then, Connolly adds the chemicals from the skeletons. The chemicals attach themselves to the group O cells and change the living blood into the same blood group as that of the dead individual, in this case from group O to group A. The blood groups of 13th century nobility are perhaps the least likely information to come from the Norton Priory site, but they're only a small part of a wealth of discoveries. The priory spread over a considerable area as the generosity of its patrons allowed the building of an elaborate chapel, cloisters, a chapter house, a warming room, and a pretty substantial kitchen area. The patrons' reward was burial in a holy place, and the more they gave, the nearer they could lie to the altar, and so the nearer to heaven. And they all lay feet to the east, so that they might sit up and face the rising sun on Judgment Day. For almost 800 years, these tall, rich, and once well-nourished skeletons lay undisturbed, except where the odd careless spade had cut them down to size to make way for modern conveniences. But if Judgment Day were to come this week, they'd find themselves disassembled, boxed, and labelled in Robert Connolly's laboratory.
When Patrick brings in another skeleton, or another 10 skeletons, another 20 skeletons, however busy he's been, we lay them out on a table like this, bone by bone, and just have a look through the whole thing. We get an idea of the age of the individual, the age of death. We get an idea, we have a look, see if there's any signs of gross pathology, any fractures, have a look at the teeth, see what sort of state they're in, and just get a general overall picture. You can tell, even without looking at an individual's teeth, for instance, you can tell whether he had a very rough diet by the size of the muscle attachment markings on his jaw and where the muscles which attach to the jaw are attached to the head. This sort of thing. So you can deduce quite a lot, really. Of course, if you've got the teeth as well, then this helps a great deal on the sort of diet they had. And when you get down to doing actual chemistry of the bones, you can get a fairly clear idea of the nutritional levels. This mandible, for instance, here, this lower jaw, it's fully mature adult male, got a nice projecting chin, but all his teeth are there. He actually lost that one there after death. The socket is completely clear. It's clear that it was lost after death. I think if we rooted around in the box, we might find it. But all the teeth are there, and if you look around, apart from the odd carie, a little bit of caries in there, but apart from that, they're all in very good condition, really, aren't they? Yeah. You consider he's from the late 13th century. It's really quite a good set of teeth, isn't it? They're really very firm. There's no flaking of the enamel, and very, very well preserved. But this chap here, for instance, about the same period, another male, tooth lost during life there. You can see the bone has grown right over. Same again there. But if you look on the inside, look at that. That was an abscess, a dental abscess, which has eroded away part of the actual jaw. It may have contributed to his death. He may have died of septicemia. No antibiotics to cure it.
Well, these two long bones are thigh bones, aren't they? What do they tell you about the owner?
Well, he was a chap of about 18 years of age. We know that from the way in which the head of the bone has fused and from the nature of his skull. Now, you'll notice that this one here is not quite straight. That's because it was fractured in life. And it's healed up and left it about an inch or so shorter than its partner.
I don't suppose it's possible to say how he came to break it.
Well, it's remarkable, actually, in this particular instance, we can say with some certainty exactly what happened. It wouldn't have needed a very, very great blow to break this leg, because he has a cyst in the bone. If we just have a look at this X-ray here, see this clear patch there, just around the break. That's a cyst formed in the bone marrow itself. They usually start up here and migrate downwards, actually, but just place it over there. You see, it's exactly at the site of the fracture, and that has weakened the walls of the bone. And so even a very slight fall would probably cause that fracture, but it has healed up quite nicely. It's remarkable the amount you can actually deduce from a skeleton, even after it's been buried for 1,000 years or so. Frequently you can point to something and say, well, this would have contributed probably to his demise. Very seldom that you can say why they died. You can say how they lived.
They lived very well, and their money provided the Priory with quite a degree of elegance.
The discovery of the tile floor and the kiln in which those tiles were fired was a very great good fortune, because the floor itself had really survived by the skin of its teeth from Victorian gardening activities, which had forked to within a couple of inches of the floor which had been laid in about 1300. We discovered that, and then we were very fortunate to discover a kiln in which the tiles had been fired. So this gave us a tremendous amount of background on that particular craft.
Well, as you can see, this isn't one of the monastic buildings. This, in fact, this little summer house belonged to the Georgian house. And we thought, well, we'll make a nice floor for it. And it was a very good opportunity to make some medieval tiles. To make these, we do just as the itinerant craftsman did. We take the clay straight out of the ground and we get the pieces of clay and we take out stones or roots or anything big that's in it that we don't want. And we squeeze it into sort of putty balls. And then we get a couple of pieces of wood of the same thickness, either side of the lump of clay, and we roll it out with a roller, just like your mum might do pastry. And then we get our shapes, we want the tiles, and we place it on the piece of clay and we cut round the edge.
It's almost magic that by using the same material from the same site, by employing the same techniques, they recreate tiles which are medieval in everything but their age. The block that's pressed into the clay to emboss a pattern on it has been carved with a shape faithfully copied from the originals that the itinerant tilemaker produced for both Norton and the nearby Warrington Priories. It's a cheerful lion. To make the 36 differently shaped tiles fit together, the teams had to find out all over again how much they shrink when they're fired. And their glaze is as medieval as everything else about them. Lead-based, its precise ingredients have been analysed by the advanced techniques of a modern chemical company's laboratory and reproduced for the experiments at Norton. The kiln, based on the miraculously preserved remains of the original, is central to the end result. As it bakes the clay, its temperature varies. Wood ash gets into the glaze, and the finished tiles are spared the precisely predictable, boring sameness of the modern factory-made item. It would take a very trained eye indeed to recognise these as 20th century tiles. They're a credit to the modern archaeologist and the medieval tradesman.
But those are not the only trades that you found.
No, one of the other itinerant trades which was carried on here by groups of travelling craftsmen was in fact making bells. We found in fact 2 bell pits in which bells have been cast, moulds have been made, the metal has been poured into them, the mould has been then torn away from the bell's been taken out, but in the pits we've found pieces of the mould surviving. And in one case we were able to reconstruct this, which gave us complete information on the shape of the bell, which had been cast in the 13th century.
A local foundry volunteered to cast a new bell. They used the medieval pattern to make a modern mould so that the original was faithfully reproduced. In spite of Henry VIII's melting it down to make cannon, the Norton bell looks and sounds unchanged. The 12th century priors would see it as more than luck that's preserved so much of their establishment, and it's certainly providential that the finds have been uncovered at a time when a scientifically based archaeology can make so much of them. But even they would be astounded that, unprotected by a covering of earth, this has survived Henry Tudor's revenge and the vandalism of Oliver Cromwell. It stood outside both Tudor and Georgian houses and survived both their demolitions before being taken to Liverpool Museum for safekeeping. Now it's about to be restored to a place of honour in its original home.
It's St. Christopher wading through the waters of the river with a fish swimming around his feet and on his shoulder carrying the Christ child.
Would that have some actual function at the Priory?
Well, it had a function, a religious function, in that Norton Priory was next to the River Mersey, which was a big barrier to communication. And I think a lot of travellers would have stayed at the Priory. And it was believed in the medieval period that if you looked at the face of St. Christopher, either a painting or a glass window, or in this case a statue, you were safe from death that day, which is why motorists still have St. Christopher medallions in their cars.
It takes, and had got, months of preparation to move the statue. It needed well-designed scaffolding to lift 2 tons and to spread the load over the museum's marble floor so that it didn't drop through into someone's office. And the statue needed a pretty substantial crate, too. Removal day, and St. Christopher was being gift-wrapped as an apprehensive Patrick Green and I arrived at Liverpool Museum. We'd calculated all we could. The proof of the pudding lay ahead, and we could only hope that the one-time patron saint of travellers would help himself along the road home. The saint looked on unmoved, if not immovable, as the team finished off wrapping him in protective foam. The scaffold supported 3 hefty girders. He'd be winched up on those in a rock climber's sling.
We've got this set up on each side. Each of these carabiners is 2.5-ton breaking strain. So we've got 5 tons of breaking strain to cope with a 2.5-ton statue. You're smiling cynically.
Well, it's all theory, you see.
Was the crate going to fit under the girders? It wasn't.
It's the diagonal you need to be worried about.
Yeah, you got the apex going across.
Could the whole thing be left suspended while we take the floor from underneath it?
No. As it tilts, you get the diagonal. And so that's a bigger dimension than from the base of the box to the top of the box. And it's that won't fit underneath. So
I can put you some 4x2s on that one.
There seemed to be a communication problem. 6 inches came off the crate, just enough to accommodate the statue and fit under the beams. But we were beginning to realise that moving a statue is probably as difficult as it looks.
How's the clearance underneath?
It's well clear of the ground now.
We are afloat. We are afloat, yeah.
St. Christopher was in the air, still 15 miles from home, but moving in what seemed to us a promising orbit. All of 3 feet nearer to Norton Priory, he was standing unsupported for the first time in 24 hours. And we could get on with nailing his crate around him. Day 2, and things seemed to be moving a bit quicker, although it was the afternoon of the second day before we finally closed the lid on St. Christopher. Even then, getting him to lie down promised to be as awkward a job as everything else. Patrick took photographs of his struggling amateur team getting nowhere, and then we had some unexpected help from the professionals, as 3 riggers who'd been watching despairingly swung into action. Totally unharmed, the saint was on his way. By the end of the third day, St. Christopher was back home in Norton Priory and more fittingly housed than he'd been for 550 years, in the entrance lobby to the priory, where the man who carved him would have waited to see the abbot. It was a great day for the removal team, but after all, only another tiny piece in the Norton Priory jigsaw. How many more there are, how many more years it will take to find them, remains to be seen.